David Fearon is Professor Emeritus of Management and Organizational Behavior at Central Connecticut State University. He is also the author of Inside Knowledge, Rediscovering the Source of Performance Improvement.
Thank you for clapping twice as loud. The story behind this book is where I'll begin. It was when I was not an undergraduate, actually. I was in the doctoral program at the University of Connecticut in the late 60s and early 70s. And I'm absolutely sure how I was going to move through that and earn my PhD and what I was going to do afterwards. But I connected in one particular class with a professor named Peter Vail. And that was it. I said, this is who I want to emulate. This is the subject area, which is organization behavior, that I want to know better and better forever. And I've never stopped learning about organization behavior. Peter was very kind to me and very supportive and got me through the dissertation. And then we sort of went in different directions. He went down to become the dean of the School of Business at George Washington University. I went on up to Maine, my home state, to become the dean of public service in the University of Maine system. But years later, many years later, and Peter and I had stayed in touch, as you do, with former teachers and friends, he reached out to me and said, Dave, I'm in hospice. He was in his late 70s, and I have a manuscript that I've worked on for 10 years. He had been paralyzed from the waist down, and he had many bouts with infection over the years, so he would write, and then he couldn't write for a while, and then he'd write again. But he had this manuscript, and he said, I can't finish it. Will you help me finish it? He's in Minnesota. I'm in Connecticut. And I'm glad I said yes, because that reconnected us. And by telephone, and then eventually by video and Zoom, we started to collaborate. And I'd work with the draft manuscript. We would sending updates back and forth as email attachments back in those days, 4 years ago. And at one point, he was having so much difficulty sitting up and writing. And I said, Peter, we've got some great thoughts going here, and while we may have to step back from the book for a bit, I've just learned how to podcast. I was faking it because I really didn't know how to podcast. So I came back to the media center here at Central and said, help, I need someone to teach me how to podcast. Set me up. And fortunately, one of the folks who used to be doing these videos, Anthony, helped me. And he learned as fast as I could learn, and we started a podcast with Peter. I have 26 episodes with my mentor, my friend, and my co-author, Peter Vail, as we talk through practice as a way of being. We were close to getting the publisher we needed when he passed away, I think, from COVID. So I found a different kind of publisher, mylibrary.world. Why are they different? Well, first, they were just breaking into something called the digital-first book field. And they needed, I guess they needed a sacrificial lamb, a guinea pig, whatever you want to name. I volunteered because I wanted to do something different, partly because my practice demanded it. I've always been an unconventional teacher here at Central. I had many different kind of experiences with my students in the business school than they were normally used to, because I wanted them to get used to be constant learners for the rest of their lives. So the book publishing process allowed me to work pretty much simultaneously with my editors and copy editors. So I would put in pages, and I would almost within a week, everything would come back to me, and I could learn and grow as a writer. So now I have a book, and it is digital, and let me tell you a bit more about it. When you subscribe to the book, you purchase the book, it opens up in sections. So I can click as I will in a moment, on any of these and begin to read. Further, once I'm reading a particular, what we call conjecture on the nature of practice, I can click on a little icon and it opens up links to the podcast episodes, to the short videos that I'm recording now about practice. It clicks to many of Peter's writings, so you can see in some cases things that he wrote in draft back in the day. And so the book becomes an experiential learning tool for us and for me as an author. In that sense, I've extended my teaching in a different direction. Well, let's see what practice is. See, I have to refer to the book in here. I know this by heart, but I'll read it anyway. Peter needed a way to open up his thinking about this question of practice, so he called it a way of thinking about practice, which is the anchor to all 32 ways that he wrote conjectures, and then I amplified conjectures on the nature of practice. But he says, I believe practice is the conscious ability, fairly consistently, to produce intended results. Now, if I stopped there, you'd say, yeah. But what Peter was famous for in my field was a book that he wrote in '89 where he coined the phrase permanent whitewater. And what he was saying, particularly to managers and managerial leaders at that time, is change is changing. What you know and acted on today will most likely be absolutely different tomorrow, and you can't use it anymore. So given that, you have to recognize that things do change constantly, and therefore practice fairly consistently to produce intended results across a range of circumstances, and to do so while growing and changing oneself to meet the changing conditions in whatever context your practice brings you. I've used this now in helping some graduate students virtually and some others think, what is your practice then? Well, first way to find out is, what results do you care about? Not just once, not just twice, but continuously and perhaps forever. Now, I went back into golf, which I swore I'd never do, and I started playing badly about 3 years ago. And those results were not making me want to come back. But I kept at it, partly because Peter would kid me and say, well, keep playing, you're going to find out what practice means or not. And yes, indeed, I did find out. One day, I started to look forward to going over to the little Westwoods golf course and to getting back out there and getting back to that hole that I had done so badly on before. And lo and behold, after a couple of years, I went from being able to play golf to becoming a golfer. And now I'm a golfer. And I can't wait for April 1st when the course opens again. See, that's the difference. The results, yes, I'd like to get better scores, and I kept score. But more of that, I wanted to be transformed. I wanted the results I was seeking to be that challenging that I never would quite succeed in topping off my expectations. And here's the key for practice for us teachers. It's the student, it's the practitioner's expectations that matter. It's the results they seek that ultimately will sustain them well past our efforts in the classroom, or that very patient pro at the golf course who kept saying, keep your head still, Dave, keep your head still. Until I decided I wanted my head still because I wanted a better swing, it never would have happened. So the power of the individual who's committed to their own practice and the results that they want to continuously achieve, no matter what circumstances come, is what we teach to when we see someone light up. That's partly why I'm so attracted to this project. So let me take you to a couple of examples of conjectures. And why do we call them conjectures? Because Peter could write theory and certainly could form an excellent hypothesis. But he didn't want the reader to be stopped at that and saying, oh, here I am. Someone has written all these theories about practice, or the 10 things to know about practice. They wouldn't want to be that much engaged in further attention to it. That's our conjecture, at least. But when you hear someone speculate, conjecturing, saying, what if, or could you possibly imagine, draws us in. So everything that Peter wrote and that I amplified with my comments, so that we have almost every word that he had on that manuscript with some copy editing, and then my teaching, if you will, saying, this is what Peter's going to say next. Think about this. Pay attention to that. What do you think at the end? What's running through your mind? It became a dialogic book. And Peter would say, this is what we thought, but what do you think? And that's how he taught me when I was at the university. He was probably one of our really smartest guys in the business school, but he would never leave it at, write this down, this is what I think. He would say, write it down, look at it, now write down what you think. And that's how the book came out. And that's what I'm hoping, because it is a digital book, people will be able to pick it up on their phones or their pads, and in a brief moment when they have a chance to think, what's this one? Let me put it up here. I touched the wrong thing and I knocked my book out, which is a reason why it's a good reason why you've got to make sure you have some paper with you. Well, let's take the first one. The first conjecture says practice is behavior. Practice is behavior. If that was the only conjecture for the entire book, we could work from that forever. Because what we're saying to people is, you have lots of thoughts, you have lots of intentions, you've read lots of books of advice or direction, and you have lots of models. There's oceans of theory available to you. But until you put them into some kind of action, it's literature, but it's not work and it's not results. So the desire for results can only be fulfilled when you actually do what achieves the results. So if you look at athletes, we're going to watch the Super Bowl this weekend. That is behavior. When those men are out there suited up and the first ball is kicked and someone starts to run, there was no practice really until that person caught the ball and started running, or the person kicked the ball and started the game. Now it's action. Now they're learning man, they're learning smam, they're learning by being set back, they're learning because they broke through and gained 20 yards. Constant learning by doing it in the game, in the moment, with clear results in mind. I'm going to bring home that ring. And that would be true of the athletes we have here at Central. That's certainly true of all of the students that I ever taught. As soon as they caught on that my field of management and organization behavior offered them some important guidance in how they were going to succeed on the job, then they started to be more serious about the readings that I assigned on all the stuff on Blackboard and all the materials that were there for them. I wanted them to fall in love with, first and foremost, doing what it took for them to achieve, in our case, in business. Whether they're on a computer, doing it for a company like Travelers, or they're out in a retail setting, convincing someone not to buy something that they really didn't need, but buying something they could really use. So that kind of moment-to-moment behavior, hopefully you keep it going right up to the end. The last phone call I had with Peter Vail, he was in the hospital, and he was having difficulty breathing. He said, Dave, but I think I'm going to feel all right. What do we have on schedule for April? He died on March 22nd. Who are we going to be talking with in our podcast? Have you heard from our publisher yet? Last day, he kept himself behaving as a author, as a teacher, and as a podcaster. He was quite proud of that. Told his grandson, I'm a podcaster now. So there. And you'll hear the joy in his voice when you listen to him. Kate Wells here, and you've heard Peter on the episode.
Absolute delight. Makes you think as you do as well, Dave.
Yeah, always made you think. Here's another one from Conjecture 4. You are the unique collector of your own practices. Practice is not just one thing. We can have a suite of practices that we carry on in our lives as a way of being. Key word. So while I am a golfer and a teacher and an author, and now a renowned speaker, did you catch that? There are other things that I'll commit myself to over time that I want to do better and better. And I'm thinking of my friend Kate Wall here, because just an hour or so ago, I was sitting over in the Newington Weight Watchers studio after being away for 4 years, resuming my weight loss practice. And it is a practice. You commit to it, and those results do not lie. And now they have so much technology that I can't even pretend anymore. I'm just going to have to track my food and see if I'm gaining or losing. So yes, practice has multiple possibilities, but you are the unique collector of your own practice. Each placing your stamp on events become your unique history. And the history of organizations where you are a practitioner. Now think about that. Those results aren't just yours. In many cases, you're achieving results for the organizations you serve, where you're a volunteer. Even in the classroom, if the teacher has better overall results at the end of the semester with maths class and linguistics, they contributed those results, not just Matt. So it is a matter of your stamp, and that's something that perhaps I learned a lot when I was growing up in Maine. What you do is your reputation, and what you're known for and how you've enhanced the lives of other people is your reputation, whatever you do. So you're putting your stamp on it when you accept the responsibility for yourself to undertake any particular practice. Let me try another one. Now, in the way of thinking, we said you're moving ahead and you arrive at various points in time, and that determines the context for your practice. This bookstore at this moment is the immediate context of my practice. So when I got here, I realized that I hadn't updated my BlueNet, so I had to get on the phone and have someone help me there. These people were helping me. I was adjusting, adapting, and figuring out how can I make this a worthwhile experience for you and people who will see this video. So that context also dictated my social connections here today, and it dictates. It brings back, by the way, a lot of memories. So when I met Eileen, the bookstore manager, I said, Eileen, when I came here in '86, the whole bookstore was there at the end, and it was nothing but books. You couldn't get a T-shirt. And look how it's changed. So that's one of the thrills of recognizing that your practice is going to bring you on an adventure. And each time it lands you in a new context, you're scoping it all in. That's called situation. The analysis of situation now is what helps you decide, do I know enough? Do I need to learn something new? Am I with people who support me, or am I with people who won't? And you take it all in because you still want more results, and you push through. So when we went through the pandemic for a horrible amount of time, that provided a very different context for all of us, and many situational challenges, including for the whole institution, and yet we made it. One more point, maybe. How are we doing on time, Matt?
One more.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one, conjecture 11. A practitioner who starts rather behaviorally, spiritually outside the practice, gradually lets inside and progressively lets its fine-grained nature, as well as its surrounding culture, come into one's reality, into one's world. Many world-class practitioners across many practices would describe their development this way. So this is a sort of classic Peter Vail, because he wrote, one of his books was called The Spiritual Nature of Leadership. But he's saying that we all sort of start on the outside. When did you start in athletics? I'm assuming you're an athlete.
I'm not, actually. Not here.
You're a runner.
I used to run.
There you go. So before you were a runner, you didn't run, and then you get into it. Now I assume you're an athlete because you look like an athlete. But spiritually, when you're going to become a runner, you can start out like other kids did, and really, you ran, you had the mechanics, but you didn't have what it took to excel. I'm assuming you maybe did or didn't. But it's spirit that gets you to excel. So you are therefore drawn more and more into the culture of a particular practice setting. And that culture adds character to your being. It adds depth. It adds connections. When I resumed my connection to all the folks involved in organization development and behavior in these last few months, particularly to promote the book, on Wednesday night or so ago, I was on a small conference, Zoom conference, with a gentleman named Edgar Schein, who I'm sure Dr. Wall knows, who was 94 years old. And he was teaching us in a wonderful way with his son Peter, very eloquently, talking about his consulting work at Digital Equipment, which used to be a famous company here in Connecticut. And at the end of the conversation, we went around and said, does anyone have last words? And I said, well, Dr. Schein, you remind me of what Peter Vail once told me when I was going to try being a consultant to an organization nearby, Hospital for Special Care. Peter said, Dave, if you don't love the organization, you can't help them. So when Ed was the last person to speak, he said, I'll just reinforce what Dave and Peter Vail said. Love is our work. Edgar Schein, without any sign of ill health, died the next day. So his very last teaching moment, the last word he used, and the last word I'll use, is love. So any practice you do, if you do it because you love yourself and you love other people who you're helping with that practice, your spirit will never let you down. You will excel. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm becoming afraid to have a conversation with you, Dave, that I might be the last conversation and I'm going to kick the bucket.
You're looking very healthy, Kate. Ed did too. He looked great. He was as sharp as a tack. And if you're going to go, that's the way to do it. You know, you take a nap and never wake up at 94. So.
You have some questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions.
Yes, thank you for being here today. So do I understand that you and Peter decided, or maybe you decided, let's get this manuscript together in the way of these podcasts that also have the clickable aspects to it.
Yes.
So that's how you were able to wrap it all up, and in fact becomes maybe a better 21st century technological tool.
Did you catch that? That's exactly what drew Peter into trying the podcasting with me. And then after he passed away, I needed a publisher to let me be expansive and be sure that, like I did with Blackboard, enrich. So it's definitely 21st century.
Very good.
Yeah. And again, that's the nature of practice, that if I left off anything I was doing without much joy anymore at the turn of the century, I would start fresh on something different. Or at a certain stage of life, like when I mentioned picking up on golf. For years, I never thought I had the time because I was working so hard here at Central, happily hard. But once I started it was rejuvenating. And we can look forward to that at any stage of life. If you can latch on to something that has more than intrinsic meaning to you, that actually produces benefits, it's great.
Question?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, just quickly, so in the book, is there some description of like how you might schedule your practice, or is it more of like thinking about practice?
There's no how-to. It's more of a what. This is what we think practice is. The how-to becomes the training responsibility, the learning responsibility of the learner. We want people to understand that while we spend a lot of time giving tremendous attention to organizational effectiveness, we're missing the boat when we aren't helping people see themselves as a sort of an organization and being concerned about their own effectiveness. So if we sensitize people through these different conjectures, practice is behavior, okay, now become more self-aware, then they will work on the how-to. As far as it being a teaching tool, though, the neat thing about anyone who moves in the direction of digital books is, with our online learning management systems now, this book is instantly available, totally digital. So I could build in, if I were still here, I would easily work in each conjecture to my modules. And they can click on them, and there they are. And then, in addition to whatever tools I could use in Blackboard, there are tools within each conjecture that'll take us to what I determined the author I wanted to have. There'll be a paper by Peter Vail. There'd be a video of me, like this one. And so it's expansive. So from a teaching standpoint, you can work this, and they're trying this out in a doctoral program at Bowling Green State University, where my publisher is. So they're seeing now that they can weave these various elements of practice in, focus on one, teach to it. So I'm happy about that. Kate?
It really seems like this book, or the digital book, and the way that you've approached releasing the conjectures and your conversations with Peter, is that you're really moving education away from a conversation that we've had together a lot, is away from memorization by PowerPoint and drilling the students into learning how to think on their own 2 feet. That's what it really sounds like, is away from shallow learning and into very, very deep levels.
Very deep learning. In fact, when I mentioned at the beginning, Kate, before you arrived, that when I took my very first class with Peter Vail at Storrs, I was shocked by the difference. No, he did not have lecture notes, and we didn't have PowerPoint back then in the 60s, but he basically said, let's start a conversation. Now, there was things to read and so forth, but it never lost the conversational tone. Why? Because he felt that what he believed in was something called co-inquiry. He believed that if the students were going to be doing the learning, why couldn't he get in on that? At the same time as he was learning new things, which he was constantly, why let the students in on that? So that's part of what you're getting at, Kate, I think, is co-learning, co-inquiry, that kind of thing from the beginning. Takes it away from the passive note-taking student, not to put down your note-taking, but thank you for taking them, to something more interactive. So all of our whole career since, we believe in experiential learning. We created exercises that got students involved in moments where they had to solve a problem or help each other out in getting through a particular knothole. And that was to demonstrate to them that you, as a managerial leader or any other form of practice you're going to undertake, you have to be a constant learner. Passivity will put you in a ditch. Or using the white water analogy of rapids, it would put you up on the rocks. And you'll be hung there, and other people are going to be agile and they're going to zoom by you. and get around to the next corner. So a lot of metaphors there get to that point. It's active learning forever.
Could you, one last question. You talked earlier about the importance not just of results, but of being transformed.
Yes.
So I'd like you to, I just wanted to ask you to talk about how that connects to what you were just talking about and to the concept of love.
Yeah.
So maybe to finish things off.
Well, the love starts, you work with people learning to teach English as a second language. So back when I was at Willimantic State, we had a Noble Community School, lab school, and many, many of the children came directly from Puerto Rico. Sometimes the night before on the plane, next day they were on our doorstep. Not a word of English. So even back then, learning English, you watch a 7 or 8 year old soak it up. They became much more confident, wonderfully noisy after a while. They weren't just chattering in Spanish to each other. So I would see as a teacher of teachers back then, transformation happening just because the language became a practice that they now kept on until they were fluent, not fluid. And but in terms of a personal transformation, again, we set the definition of transformed. Others may notice it or not, but we can tell in our hearts when we are proud of something that we finally learned to do. Maybe no one even saw us do it, but we did it, and we know we did it. And so we say to ourselves, there, now you never have to go back to doing it that way anymore, would you? And that goes on for the rest of your life. So this notion that I'm finished and done at 70 or 80, in my case, is a tragic notion. Instead of saying, what else can I undertake, or continuing doing even better and differently, that I can be as vital as a teacher as Ed Schein was the night before he passed away. But I think if we started designing every course at this institution from a position of love, even before we see the students, I'm going to love whoever comes through that door in the sense of agape. I'm going to really love them. I'm going to love to see them improve. I'm going to love to hear about them. Now, here's the last point. Years later, I have a podcast episode, which I'll be putting out next week, with a student who graduated in 2013. And she was in a couple of my classes. And she worked and still works in a corporate job, but she's also started a new business in baking. And she went through, while working, put herself through culinary school. She's learning everything possible there in Madison where she lives and how to get Sarah Kay's baking products used by people. And I asked her at the end of the conversation, Sarah, what do you remember about a class with me? She said, well, I remember the quality course that you taught. And I remember you saying over and over again, when you see your customers improve and when you feel them feeling the love, if you will, of what you've given them, then that's quality, nothing less. So thank you very much.